former chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, Sir Richard Dearlove. Sir Richard, have we sleptwalked into this situation?
Well, not exactly, because there have been warnings. For example, about a year ago, the head of MI5 said publicly that China was a significant, perhaps the most significant threat to our national security. But if you go back further, I think we have been neglectful of the Chinese threat. We've rather taken the attitude that China is a benign trading partner, and now we're beginning to wake up to the reality of a communist-led China state with significant global ambitions.
Yeah, it was the former Prime Minister David Cameron who said it was a golden era for relations between Britain and China around a decade ago. He's now Foreign Secretary, of course. Do you think he was guilty of showing too much hubris in kicking off that relationship?
Well, I'm reluctant to criticise the Foreign Secretary, but the answer to your question is unfortunately yes. I think that David Cameron and George Osborne were very, they were incautious in the way that they regarded the UK's relationship with China. And some of us were shouting loudly from the sidelines way back then. And
what were you saying to them? What were you saying to them at the time? And did they just ignore you?
Wake up to the reality. Well, I was out of office by then, I believe. But they just ignored us. And I mean, for example, I took a leading position in the UK in criticising the fact that Huawei was heading to build our 5G. And there was, massive criticism of our expression of caution in relation to Huawei. Well, eventually the government changed its policy, thank goodness, because they woke up to the reality. But it took a long time to persuade people about this. And I think now we understand. But we only have to look at the example of Australia and what's happened in Australia with their much closer relationship with China.
Yeah, well, expand upon that, because I mean, if things go that way for us, what does it look like?
China's a crucial trading partner, but the Chinese government has been trying to, as it were, delve into Australian political life and create points of influence and pressure. And despite the fact that Australia has this close relationship with China, on which, there's an interdependence on both sides, Australian politicians have been very blunt, very brutal, and very quick to criticize China, despite the threats that China made economically to Australia. And I think they have a realistic view of the relationship. We've now got to wake up. Well, I think we have woken up, but we've now got to make sure that we have a realistic view of living with China as a trading partner.
Let's just set the context, though. As a trading partner, it is our sixth biggest. Something like £100 billion of trade is done between the UK and China. Of course, more imports than exports. More Chinese students come to UK universities than from any other nation. You mentioned Huawei and it trying to get involved in the 5G network. You only have to look at how US legislators are keeping a close eye on TikTok to know that China has inveigled its way into all areas of life in the West. You say we've woken up, but we left it late.
Yeah, we have left it late, but it's not too late. I mean, we should never have accepted China as a trading partner in the WTO. We should have, as it were, put conditions around that. We were very naive. But, we now know that Xi Jinping has very clear strategic ambitions. I mean, look at the documentation for the 20th Party Congress. It actually says in plain language that China's bent on a policy of world domination by 2049. They're not a benign trading partner. They know us very well. We've allowed them into every aspect of our life, particularly higher education. We've educated their elite. How many people in the UK really understand China? It's a very, very small group of specialists. And, the Chinese Communist Party leadership is not benign. They are, I wouldn't describe them yet as enemies, but they are very aggressive competitors and they have a clear global ambition. Look, China doesn't understand win-win. China's philosophy in handling these relationships, it's we win, you lose. And we need to be aware of that.
So, Richard, if you were still running MI6, if you were still in those conversations with our Five Eyes partners, what would you be doing now?
Well, coordinating very closely. I mean, Five Eyes is a wonderful intelligence alliance, and the key partners are all of massive interest to China. So a coordinated policy on the part of the United States, Canada, Australia, UK, and New Zealand makes, as it were, a powerful ring of cooperation where the Chinese can wake up that they haven't got an open door to our societies. They haven't got an open door to our political life. We need, as it were, to be tough, to be clear, to be concise, precise in how we handle the relationship and not, as it were, conduct it with any illusions.
You point to the US there, and we read today in other places that the US is in close conversation with Japan about these risks as well. Does there need to be a broader coalition than just the English-speaking countries?
Well, obviously. And we see there's AUKUS, the defence agreement with the United States and Australia. But I think that our clear, obvious partners are Japan on the one hand and India on the other, both of whom have their own reasons, clear reasons for, as it were, a strategic ring that takes on, China's very aggressive global behavior at the moment. You only have to look and see what's happening in the Pacific with their sort of assertion of Chinese sovereignty over what's called the 9-dash line. I mean, it's symptomatic of a much bigger global problem.
It also begs the question as to whether we have enough money to spend on security and defence at the moment. Of course, prompted primarily because of the situation in Ukraine, there are those who are calling for a higher percentage of GDP, higher than 2.5%, 3% maybe, to be spent on defence and security. Do you think we should?
Yeah, we should. I mean, in my view, we should increase our defence expenditure to at least 3% of GDP. I think with regard to the intelligence and security community, in the period, after a sort of major terrorist threat, which has endured since 9/11 or before 9/11, their budgets have been increased, so they're reasonably well staffed and reasonably well budgeted. And I don't think there's a big shortfall, but certainly when it comes to the armed forces, I mean, the lesson of Ukraine is that if you want peace in Europe, prepare for war. We need to spend heavily. We need to increase our capability. And with regard to the China threat, we also need a larger navy.
Look, the final question coming back to China as well. People will hear, or they're going to hear from Oliver Dowden in the Commons shortly, that some 40 million records have been accessed via this Chinese hack. For people watching us this lunchtime, should they be concerned about that? Should people be worrying about Chinese influence? Should we be doing more as individuals to make things more secure for ourselves?
We all need to be educated about the reality of this threat. And as it were, the loss of our electoral registration records to China is devastating. Everybody's address and personal, identity is there. Look, the Chinese are putting in place their, strategic interests for a world which is maybe not as friendly as, well, it isn't particularly friendly at the moment, but it could get a lot worse. And I mean, I've written recently, for example, about the threat from Chinese electric vehicles, which is another issue. Maybe not for the interview, but, we need to be alive to the fact that the Chinese are building a capability which could be used against us in the future in quite a devastating fashion.
We have covered that story on EV, Sir Richard, and I appreciate your insight and expertise this lunchtime on Sky News. Sir Richard Dearlove there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.